محمد وآل محمد صلوات. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let us begin today's program with the recitation of the Holy Quran. Ba'az buland salawat. Hold on to this.
Please recite a salawat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والنجم إذا هوى ما ضل صاحبكم وما غوى وما ينطق عن الهوى إن هو إلا وحي يوحى علمه شديد القوى ذو مرة فاستوى وهو بالأفق الأعلى ثم دان فتدلى فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى فأوحى إلى عبده ما أوحى ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى أفتمارونه على ما يرى ولقد رآه نزلة أخرى إن عند سدرة المنتهى عندها جنة المأوى إذ يغشى السدرة ما يغشى ما زغ البصر وما طغى لقد رأى إذ يغشى السدرة ما يغشى ما زاغ البصر وما طغى لقد رأى من آيات ربه الكبرى أفرأيتم اللات والعزى ومناة الثالثة الأخرى ألكم الذكر وله الأنثى تلك إذا قسمة ضيزى إن هي إلا أسماع سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان إن يتبعون إلا الظن وما تهوى الأنفس ولقد جاءهم من ربهم الهدى أم للإنسان ما تمنى فلله الآخرة والأولى وكم من ملاك في السماوات لا تغني شفاعتهم شيئا إلا من Salawat.
MashaAllah. Ahsan, ahsan. I would now like to request the Sheikh to please ascend the member. Ba'awaz buland salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات الله صلى على محمد وعلى محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraja. We will continue our discussion today with a quick review of what we discussed in our last talk. We reached this point in the life of our Prophet where we discussed the different empires that existed at that time. The Persian Empire was a great empire that had existed for hundreds, thousands of years. The Roman Empire that we have all heard of, or to be more accurate, the Byzantine Empire, they also existed for many, many years. And they had many backs and forths with each other. Every couple of years, this one would attack this one, the other one would attack the other one. And somehow, some way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept the Arab and the Arabian Peninsula away from all of this. Out of all of the back and forth that the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire were having with each other, the Arab and the Arabian Peninsula stayed away from all of it. And it seems as though this was the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and part of His plan. And we said this is also important to understand the context from which the Prophet is now coming forward, because when we talk about someone who's going to bring a book that is going to remain 1400 years and counting, You would assume that someone would bring a book like this from within the Roman Empire, from within the Persian Empire, a place that has a civilization, customs, culture, schools, universities. And the reality is the Arabian Peninsula had none of these things. And in fact, most of them, almost all of them, did not even know how to read and write. This is the context in which the Prophet started his life. And we spoke about his birth that was also accompanied with a number of sad events. A birth that was preceded by losing his own father. He grew up, based on this opinion, not ever seeing his own father because his father passed away in Medina. And at a very young age, at the age of 6, also his mother he now loses. And at the age of 8, roughly, his next guardian, which was his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, he also loses. And throughout his life, he has certain women who play a key role in raising him. Out of these women, we mentioned Thawbiyah, the person who nursed the Prophet at a young age. We mentioned Halima, of course. He was with Halima for almost 5 years. And of course, Ayman, who worked for the household of the Prophet. And also none but Fatima bint Asad. And out of all of these women, some of them, or most of them, the Prophet referred to as his own mother. And this showed that he never forgot about the good that these women had done unto him. But in particular, out of these women, it seems as though he had the closest bond and the closest relationship with none but Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And we explained the moments and the words that the Prophet uttered when Fatima bint Asad was being lied down in her grave. This is where we ended our discussion. Tonight, inshallah, we'll continue with the discussion. And in particular, we'll focus on the youth of the Prophet and his marriage to his wonderful wife, Khadija, salamullahi alayha. And we will do so by posing the following questions. Number 1, what stories are there that are narrated in history that speak about the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guiding the Prophet at a very young age towards good characteristics and towards virtues? Number 2, why couldn't the Quran have been taught to the Prophet during his trips that he was making at this young age with his uncle Abu Talib, particularly the trips that he made to Syria and the interactions that he had with people of the Christian faith in that area? Number 3, what is the agreement known as the agreement of Hilful Fudul? And what lesson can we learn about the life of the Prophet and how he acted like a prophet before he was even chosen as a prophet because of this agreement? Number 4, what did the Prophet say when he chose Ali ibn Abi Talib out of all of the children of Abu Talib to bring him to his own house and raise him like his own child? And number 5, and finally, how did the Prophet show his wisdom when Quraysh were about to have a war with one another in the way they were going to put back Al-Hajar al-Aswad back into the Kaaba? What wisdom did the Prophet show in this regard? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allow me to begin from here. When we talked about the birth of the Prophet, we said that history mentions certain signs, certain supernatural events that are taking place before his birth. And these are narrated. Some of them are narrated by his own mother. Amina has narrated some of these. Some of them are external events that people have narrated about things that happened in the region, in the area. And there is some sort of dispute with regards to the details of these, and we may not be 110% sure that all of them happened. Nonetheless, they are mentioned in books of history. It's mentioned in the books of history that when the Prophet was born, that certain parts of the palace of the king of Persia started to fall apart. That the idols in the Kaaba, they started to fall. As they were stood up, they started to fall, and other events as well. But one of those events that took place and was really the foundation of the calendar of the Arab of that time was the incident that took place with the army of the elephants. This is one of those signs of the coming of the Prophet that everyone agrees on, partially because the verses of the Quran reference it as well. And this was a story that many of us have heard before, that this person who was in charge, Abraha, who was in charge of Yemen, and there's a story how he came into power over there. Nonetheless, he had built a big temple for himself over there, and he wanted people to come and worship in this temple. The problem was the Kaaba was there, and the Kaaba was a problem for him because people knew how holy the Kaaba was. They wouldn't come and worship in this temple. The Kaaba was still the focal point. People wanted to pay more attention towards the Kaaba. And this back and forth happened to an extent where Abraha, his arrogance did not allow for it. He said, I'm going to go and ruin this Kaaba and get it done with. Now pay attention. The point I'm making here, we're going to come back to this at the end of the story. Look at how evil Abraha is and how evil his plan is. And then we'll talk about who his lineage led to. In other words, who was his child. And you'll see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings so much good sometimes out of a person who's so evil. That's a side note. Hold on to that. We'll come back to it at the end of the story. Abraha says, I'm going to put together this army. And the Quran tells us that in the forefront of this army were elephants that they naturally would have brought from other parts of the world, because Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula is not a place where elephants could possibly live, as far as we know. This army is on its way. It comes closer to Mecca. Abraha stops the army before it enters into Mecca. And he sends his representative to go into the city of Mecca and look for whoever is the elder of Mecca. Who's in charge? Which means you would be the older person. And of course, that is none but Abdul Muttalib. And this representative is walking in Mecca and he sees everybody's left. So only Abdul Muttalib and his family. Nobody else is here. Because everybody else is running for their lives. Because Mecca didn't have a civilization, didn't have a government, didn't have any of these things. All they had was this Kaaba. That's all they had. They had all run up into the mountains and into the valleys. This representative calls out. He says, who's in charge of Quraysh? Who's going to come? I have to speak to them. They say, well, Abdul Muttalib. So Abdul Muttalib now comes. Now you can imagine what this moment is like, where you're like a tenth of this army that's standing in front of you. And this army has elephants. And you may barely have like bows and arrows and things of this nature. So Abdul Muttalib now enters into the tent of Abraha. And the narration says that initially Abraha showed him a lot of respect. He said, I like the way you carry yourself. Because he was noble. He was nobility. Right? Abdul Muttalib was nobility. So he had him sit by him. And he said, listen, I have not come to kill the people of Mecca. I have just come to ruin the Kaaba. It's like the only thing I'm after. I'm not here to shed blood. I've just come to get rid of this Kaaba because this is my problem. And he said, Abdul Muttalib, what do you think about this? And Abdul Muttalib brought him a request that was very, very odd. He said, yes, I heard that you said you wanted to ruin this Kaaba, but my request from you is the 20 camels that you took away from me, you have to give them back. Because your army just came in here. They took a bunch of cattle, and amongst that cattle, they also took my camels as well. You have to give back these 20 camels. And the narration says Abraha did not take this very well. He immediately lost all of his respect for Abdul Muttalib. He said, are you kidding me? I've come here to ruin the Kaaba. I've come here to create a situation where you and your people will not even have a livelihood anymore. And instead of falling to my feet and begging me, you're saying, give me back my camels. And he said, I lost all of my respect for you, Abdul Muttalib. You should have been asking me about the Kaaba. And this is where Abdul Muttalib uttered those famous words. He said, Ana Rabbul Ibil. He said, I'm the one who's in charge of the camels. وَلِلْبَيْتِ رَبٌّ يَمْنَعُهُ. And the house of Allah has its own Lord, and He will take care of His own house Himself. I don't have to worry about that. And Abraha did not understand this. He said, this is ridiculous. Gave him the camels. He went back. And of course, the narrations tell us that then the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sent. And birds came, these birds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls ababil in Surat Al-Fil. Says these birds came and they were carrying with themselves rocks and stones. And when these rocks and stones would hit the troops, their lifeless bodies would fall on the ground. What type of rocks were these? Where did they come from? Where did these birds come from? We have no idea. This is just part of the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala references this in the verses of the Quran to tell Quraysh, listen, if anyone was going to oppose the Prophet, it shouldn't have been you guys. It shouldn't have been you. You just witnessed our miracle. You just witnessed what we did. We protected this Kaaba because the Kaaba was part of your business. It was part of the way you provided for yourself. So how dare you guys? If it was anyone else, you'd say, okay, there are other people. You saw with your own eyes when we saved Mecca, when we saved the Kaaba. And this sign of the coming of the Prophet is probably one of the only signs that every historian, of course, agrees on. And this is where the Prophet is now going to grow up. Because this year, that is the year of his birth, is going to be known as Amul Fil, the year of the elephant. You know how we mentioned about before COVID and after COVID? This is going to be before the year of elephant, after the year of elephants. Recite a salawat, please. The Prophet is now being raised within the household of Abu Talib and Fatima bint Asad. And this is where the Prophet, based on narration, starts to see glimpses of the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving to him. This is important. Why? Because this helps us understand that the Prophet, when the prophethood began and his bi'athah started, was it really so surprising to him? Or did he already know that he was going to be special? This is why these details are so important, yes? And we'll get into that momentarily. What were those things that the Prophet saw before his prophethood even began? But the important point that I have to come back to before I forget, this Abraha that we were just talking about, this person who wanted to come and ruin the Kaaba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. And you say, Ya Allah, why didn't you just kill him before he could even get here? Why didn't you just get rid of him? It's easy for you. It's easy for God. He can do it. It's interesting. Do you know, historians say, some of them say, the grandchild of this same Abraha, who's going to come and ruin the Kaaba and destroy the house of Allah, and you say nothing good can possibly come out of this person. His grandson happened to be none but the famous Najashi, that the Muslims will at one point, inshallah for us a couple nights from now, they will go and they will have nowhere else to go but to be under the refuge of who? Of this Najashi. This is the evil Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings out of this evil, the good that He wants to bring out of it. The same Abraha will give birth to people that then, instead of coming to ruin the Kaaba, they will be there to help the Muslims in a way that nobody else could possibly do so. This is the situation with Abraha. The Prophet is now growing up, and now the narrations say that he started to see certain signs, meaning there were angels with him who were guiding him towards virtues and good deeds at a young age. And the Prophet narrates the story himself. He says, when I was very, very young, we had a game. Kids used to play this game. They used to take their clothing, and in their clothing, they used to pour in rocks and stones. They would carry it, and then they would play with those rocks and stones. So I, like all of the children, started to do so. I had to take the rocks and stones, and I would have to lift my clothing to carry them. But naturally, you know, the clothing at that time was not a multi-layered sort of thing. And hence, when these children were lifting their clothes, certain things were showing. And then he says that one time when I wanted to lift my clothes, I felt my hands go down. I couldn't lift my clothes. I couldn't be part of the way the other children were playing. And he says, I knew right then and there that this is an angel telling me, or something, some guidance is telling me to put down my clothing. This continues. The Prophet gets a little bit older. He wants to take part in some of the parties that the people of Quraysh are having. Every custom you go to, they'll have some form or shape of a party, of the gathering, so on and so forth, entertainment. He says, I was also going to become part of this gathering, part of this entertainment. He says, I left my friend and I told him I'm going to go take part in the gathering tonight. He says, when I came, the moment I sat in the gathering, before I could be a part of it and enjoy this gathering, I fell asleep. And I woke up the next day from the heat of the sun. And I realized that these events, there are certain things that are happening around me, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding me, that this is not what you're supposed to be doing, and that is not what you're supposed to be doing. And this helps us understand that when the prophethood actually began, it wasn't this thing that the Prophet had no idea about. No, it seems as though, other than these, we'll mention some other ones as well, he kind of had an idea that, you know, he's special in certain ways. And you add to this what happened to the Prophet when now he is going to go in his first trip with his uncle Abu Talib to the land of Syria. The people of Quraysh, their way of providing for themselves was two main ways. They had the Kaaba. So when people used to come, make sacrifices, donations, whatever the case might be, they were taking that. That was number one. Number two, they had business routes that they used to go on, right? إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ was safe. The trip of the summer and the trip of the winter, these were business trips that Quraysh used to make. These trips, one of them they used to make north towards Syria, and the path, hold on to this detail because we're going to come back to it later. Their path used to pass by the city of Medina. When we discuss the Battle of Badr, this detail is extremely important. This was one of their trips. They used to go from Mecca towards Medina, towards the north, towards Syria. The second route that they had was south. They used to go towards Yemen. And this route and these business trips, Hashim, the great-grandfather of the Prophet, was the one who had begun this custom, and Quraysh continued on this. So on one of these trips, Abu Talib is now going to head north. He's going to go towards Syria. This story I'm about to mention, I'll put this disclaimer there, that historians have mentioned it in a number of ways. Some of it is definitely made up. There's no doubt about it. Some of it we can essentially accept. So there's dispute here. But the version I'm mentioning is the version that is more acceptable based on our principles. Abu Talib is going to head towards the north. And the narration says, this is from Shaykh al-Saduq's Ikmaluddin. He says, I saw that Muhammad was with me, but because Abdul Muttalib had advised me to always keep the Prophet with me at all times, I did not want to leave him in this trip either. So people came to me and said, Abu Talib, you're just going to leave? You're going to leave Muhammad here? And I said, no, I'm going to take Muhammad with me. And they said, but it's hot. It's a difficult trip. How are you going to take him? He said, I'll make it work one way or another. I can't bear leaving Muhammad alone by himself. I have to take him with me. This is how Abu Talib did things. Yes. And he never left the Prophet to himself. When we talk about the valley, Shi'ba Abi Talib, these difficult moments, we'll talk about the role that Abu Talib played, that no one else was able to play for the Prophet. He said, I'm going to take him with me. He says, we started out on this journey, and Abu Talib says, as we continued on this journey, we saw that everywhere Muhammad goes in the heat of the summer, there is a cloud that follows him. And the people in the caravan were always surprised by this. Until we got to the city of Basra. This is different from your city of Basra in Iraq. That's a different city. That's going to be northeast of Mecca. This is north of Mecca. This is a city in Syria. It says, we got to this city. And Shaykh al-Saduq narrates that the people who were in the caravan said that when we got to the city of Basra, we entered into the market. When we entered into the market, we as a people of Quraysh were travelers there. We didn't have a place to stay. But people in this market of the city of Basra, they saw us. And they approached us. And when we paid attention, we saw their group, they're a part of a Christian church. And they approached us. They said, why don't you come to our church? And we will host you. And we will feed you guys. You guys are travelers. So the narration says the people of Quraysh said, no, it's okay, we're fine. They said, no, come. Maybe you get some food out of it. Maybe you get some rest out of it. They insisted. And they said, fine, we'll go. Narration says the people of Quraysh went and they sat in this church. And maybe they started to eat and benefit from the hosting of the church. They say that from far away we saw their scholar, the main scholar. He sat there and he was looking at us very closely. And with him he had a book. And this book he used to look into and then he used to look at us. So look into the book and look at us. As if he's looking for, are you matching the description? So then after a while he looked at us and he said, where are you guys from? I said, we're from Mecca, from Quraysh. Which tribe? Which sub-tribe? He said, is this all of you? Or is there someone else with you? And he said, this is most of us. But there's a couple other people left. And there's also this orphan that we have with us. So orphan of Abdul Muttalib. We have him as well. And then the narration says that this Christian monk or priest, he started to think very deeply. And he was leaning on his staff. And then he looked at us, he said, would you take me and show me where this orphan is? said, yes, we'll take you. We went into the middle of the market and we saw that Muhammad is there and he has already made profit. Now, this is not an adult at this point. 10, 12, maybe whatever the age might be. But if you're 10, 12 at that age, you're a lot more mature than at this time, yes? He says he saw him. We wanted to tell him, this is the one you're looking for. Before we could speak, he said, this is the one. This is the one that I knew the description of. And I knew he was going to come. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. He said he came closer. He looked at the Prophet. He said he carries with himself life and death. Carries with himself life for those who do good. Carries with himself death for those who do wrong. Like he is going to dominate essentially. And then based on some narrations, he looked at Abu Talib. He said, Abu Talib, you have to be careful of this child. To take care of this child. Because there are those who, if they know who he is, there will be a threat against him. And some narrations say that Abu Talib changed the path and he went back directly to Mecca because he was worried about this. Some narrations say no, he continued with the trip just with extra security and safety in mind. Orientalists have come to look at this story. We'll take a quick side note here. And they have said, we found out the place where Muhammad went and learned the Quran. He went here, he spoke to this Christian priest or monk. He taught him all of the Quran right here. And what a laughable attempt. What a silly argument that a child of 10 or 12 is now going to memorize all of these verses. And then over the next 23 years of his life, he's going to start reciting these verses. And from Christian person who probably was speaking a different language than Arabic altogether. And you won't believe it, but Orientalists have gone on and on about this. Yes, he went there and he learned from this person. And for you and I, we're not even going to entertain this discussion. Why? Because at the end of the day, anyone can come up with any story and say, oh, the Prophet learned the Quran from here. The Prophet learned the Quran from there. I don't know, some jinn was giving some inspiration to him. Someone was in Mecca and came and told him these things. At the end of the day, the challenge of the Quran remains the same. The challenge of the Quran is very simple and very clear-cut. If it's made up, bring something like it. That's it. It's not that complicated. It's interesting. I think a middle schooler, high schooler asked me the other day, a couple of weeks ago. Said, my teacher says that our Quran, this book of the Quran is made up. How do I prove to her that this is not made up? It's very simple. Tell her to bring something like it. It's 1400 years. How come no one can bring something like it? If it's so easy, if it's that simple, if you can undermine the faith of billions of Muslims, wouldn't you make a hard attempt at trying to come up with something like this? Now, how is the Quran a miracle and what are the elements that make it a miracle is a longer discussion. But the simple challenge of the Quran is what? It's made up. Go ahead, make something like it. Can others make something like it and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't allow for their plan to go through? Or can they fundamentally not make anything like it at all? There's dispute amongst our scholars. But regardless, the Quran has made this claim and has been making this claim for 1400 years. You think it's made up? Okay, bismillah. I don't have to prove to you that this Quran is a miracle. You just have to come up with something like it. And there have been attempts, and of course they have failed. The challenge of the Quran is very simple. And we're going to come back to this idea. As I have this long rant to go on, I have a lot of venting to do when it comes to the Quran. When we talk about how the religion of the Prophet spread in the city of Medina, we're going to come back to the Quran. And you will see the role that the Quran played in spreading the religion of Islam in the city of Medina. Nonetheless, Orientalists have gone on and on about proving that yes, it was in this trip that all of this happened, and the argument is so weak, I don't even want to spend any time on it. This is the Prophet, now he comes back from this trip, he's getting a little bit older. What happens is another agreement in the city of Mecca known as the agreement of Hilful Fudul, the swearing of this group of people. What happened was someone had come into Mecca, his rights had been violated. He had essentially sold an item, but he had not received the price of this item. So this person comes into Mecca and near the Kaaba and he starts to shout out to the different tribes. And he says, people, you have to come and you have to help me because I sold this item to this person, but he hasn't come back to give me the money. What happened here was an incident that the Prophet would remember throughout his life over and over again. And that was this, that a group of the tribes of Quraysh came together and they made a pact together. They made an agreement together. That from now on, we are going to be one group together. If anyone feels like their rights have been violated, they can come and call on us. You can invoke the pact. And if you invoke the pact, all of the people, regardless of whether the person who violated the rights is from their tribe or not from their tribe, they have to stand up and they have to be willing to get back the rights of this individual. And the Prophet says, I took part in this agreement with my family and with my tribe. And he says years later, even after he began his prophethood, he said, if they asked me to take part in an agreement like that, I would do it all over again. Hilful Fudul. What does this teach us about the Prophet? The lesson. It teaches us that he was acting like a prophet before he was even a prophet. He didn't sit there, say, yes, the injustice that's happening, the oppression that's happening, has nothing to do with me. Let them do whatever they want to do. Oh, now I'm a prophet, now I'm all about justice and no more oppression. That's not what he did. Before he was a prophet, he looked at this cause and he said, this is a cause that aligns with my fitrah. It's a cause that I can get behind. And so even after his prophethood, he says, if I had to go through it again now, I would still go through it again. And in another narration, he says, even if they were willing to give me crazy amounts of wealth, I would not be willing to give up that agreement. This shows that even if people don't necessarily agree with your religion, your faith, but their rights are being violated, this is something that the Prophet did. He supported them. Now, to what extent can you do this? That's a separate discussion. It's not like the Prophet, when he was part of this agreement, he stopped every oppression in the world. No, there was a lot of oppression that took place. Even during the time of the Prophet, there were wrong things that used to happen, sometimes by his own troops. And he would rebuke them, of course, but they would happen. But nonetheless, as much as he could, whatever was in his capacity, he agreed to stand up for them. The word starts to get out about who Muhammad is. People are trusting him more. They're seeing the good characteristics of the Prophet more. And they saw these good characteristics even more when Hajar al-Aswad fell out of the Kaaba. The narration says that there were floods that came towards Mecca and ruined the Kaaba to a certain extent. So now Quraysh came together to repair the Kaaba. This is their livelihood, by the way. They don't believe in it in the sense of, oh, we have to worship one God and all this. No, they believe in it because people come from far away to visit this house. We have to fix it. We have to repair it. They came together. Everyone had this fight. Who's going to take Hajar al-Aswad and raise it with their own hands and put it within the Kaaba? And the narration says these tribes got so serious about this that some of them made pacts that if anyone else tries to do this, we'll go to war with them. We will kill them. And the way you know they were very serious is that part of their bay'ah that they did, the allegiance that they gave to one another, they dipped their hands in blood. This is, when you I don't know if you become part of a gang, na'udhu billah. You have to, stamp with blood, or I don't know how it works, whatever. They're using blood. And this continued for a number of days, such that they couldn't even carry on with repairing the Kaaba anymore. Because when they got to this part, there was so much debate, they couldn't even go further. Until at one point, famous person of Quraysh, he said, listen, enough is enough. Whoever comes towards the Kaaba now, he will be the one who will have permission to put back the black rock, or Hajar al-Aswad. So what happened? They waited and none came but a 35-year-old Muhammad who entered. Salawatullahi salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The Prophet enters, and this is the wisdom of the prophets. This wisdom will stay with the Prophet until the end of his life. And that wisdom is how he's able to bring people together. This is the critical thing about the Prophet. He can bring multiple tribes together and make them one ummah. This is what's special about him. Now, this is even before he's a prophet. Makes it even more special. He came, they said, Muhammad, you have been chosen to put back Hajar al-Aswad. Everyone is okay with this. And the Prophet said, that's wonderful. Each of you will go, we'll put a blanket, we'll put a fabric down. Everyone is going to carry a corner of this fabric. Everyone is going to carry a corner of this blanket, and together we will put Hajar al-Aswad back together. And this brought these tribes together. And the wisdom that we learn from the Prophet is that you're supposed to be the type of person in every situation that brings people together. There are people who make a small disagreement a huge one. There are people who make a huge disagreement a small one. They diffuse the situation so well. That is what we need more of. Even on a personal level. Even in our relatives, family members. That's what we need more of. We don't need, oh, did you hear what they said? We don't need more of that. What we need more of is, yeah, they said this, but that's what we need more of. And this is the wisdom that the Prophet showed of himself. Another salawat, please. The word about the trustworthiness of the Prophet is getting out. The word about the wisdom of the Prophet is getting out. And this is where Abu Talib comes to his nephew. And he says, Muhammad, I want you to be able to get married. I want you to be able to have a career of your own. Do you know that Khadija is looking for someone to partner with her and to take her wealth and do business transactions with it? Are you willing to go with Khadija to be a partner in her business with her? Now, Khadija having the type of wealth that she had was very, very critical and very important, because we talked about this before. A woman having that type of wealth was very unordinary. It's very unusual. So women, they didn't really have inheritance in that sense of the word. And even when they would get married, their wealth would be taken from them. And somehow, some way, Khadija had been able to manage to not only have her wealth, to grow her wealth as well. So Abu Talib came to the Prophet. He said, Muhammad, do you want to partner with her? And the Prophet showed that he wanted to be a part of this. But he said, I feel a bit shy to go and make this suggestion myself. So it seems as though Abu Talib then went and brought this up with Khadija. And Khadija, of course, herself was more than happy with this. So Khadija approached the Prophet and said, you can take my wealth and you can take 2 of my servants with you, and you guys can go back to Syria. Now imagine, he's going to go back to where he has childhood memories, essentially. And interestingly enough, on his way, every time he goes to Syria, he's passing by where? He's going back, pass by the city of Medina. And where's the city of Medina? What does the city of Medina have? His father and his mother. Yes? His father in Medina, his mother a little outside of Medina. Every time these memories are coming back for the Prophet. The Prophet accepts this. They go on this trip. When they go on this trip, they are coming back. The profit that they have made is so much that the servant of Khadija turns to the Prophet and says, you should go ahead of the caravan and you should go and tell Khadija how much profit we made and how well we did in this business trip. She will be happy to hear directly from you. So the Prophet rides ahead and he comes to the house of Khadija and he explains what happened. Then the servants of Khadija also come, and the servants of Khadija have more to say about the Prophet than he has to say about himself. Because he came and said, the Prophet we made was, alhamdulillah, it was wonderful, and so on and so forth. When the servants of Khadija came, they said, you don't know who this man is. When people used to come to him and used to swear by the idols, he used to stop them mid-sentence. He said, don't swear to me by Lat and Uzza. These were the name of the idols. I don't believe in these things. He said, this man, everywhere he went, the blessings came with him. And this is where history, unanimously historians will agree, that somehow, some way, the suggestion of the marriage came initially from Khadija. Though she did not approach the Prophet directly herself, but the suggestion came from Khadija. She was the one who initiated this process. And the narration says that Abu Talib came with the Prophet. And now imagine, Abu Talib has now raised this child, because he was a child when he went to the house of Abu Talib. Now he's reached the age of marriage. Imagine how proud Abu Talib feels in these moments. He sat and he started to recite his own khutbah. And he said, all praise belongs to Allah. We are from Quraysh and we are from the descendants of Ismail. And I have here with my nephew, pay attention to what Abu Talib says. He said, I have here with me my nephew, who is the best amongst us, but he doesn't carry a lot of wealth with him. But wealth is something that comes and goes, like the shade of trees come and go. And I want him to marry Khadija. And some of the relatives of Khadija were there. And Khadija also shows her response. And Abu Talib says, I will take on paying the dowry. And then Khadija herself says, no, Abu Talib, what you said I agree with, but guess what? You can only go and pay for the walima. I will take care of the dowry myself. Narration says Quraysh heard about this. Other people heard about it, people talk. They said, since when does the woman pay the dowry? And then look at what Abu Talib said. Abu Talib said, if you had a character like the character of my nephew, your wives would have paid your dowry too. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He said, if you had a character like the character of my nephew, your wives would have paid your dowries too. But your characters are so bad, your wives don't want to be with you even though you paid their dowries. This is Abu Talib defending the Prophet. This marriage now begins. This marriage was such a blessed marriage that years after Khadija had passed away, when the sister of Khadija used to come around, the Prophet would be reminded of Khadija. So much so that other wives of the Prophet could not take this. And this is narrated in Sahih Muslim, that some of the wives of the Prophet used to tell the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, enough. How much do you think about this old lady? Forgive me. This old lady. God gave you better people than her. And the Prophet would explain why he did not give him better people than her. He said, no, Khadija was different. Khadija believed in me when nobody did. She helped me with her wealth when nobody did. And she supported me when nobody did. And these are narrations that are narrated in Sahih Muslim, some in Bukhari and in other books of the Sunni school of thought. And it raises serious theological questions, but we don't really want to go into that polemic discussion. How is it that this person who's so jealous of who Khadija is has now become at the same time the most beloved person in the eyes of the Prophet? It's a theological discussion we have to have here, and a polemic discussion. We'll leave that for another time. Nonetheless, this relationship between the Prophet and Khadija continues. From this relationship, not only did it benefit Khadija and the Prophet, it benefited a number of other people, 2 people in particular. But before we go there, there's one lesson to be learned from the marriage of Khadija and the Prophet. And that is, everything in the eyes of Khadija was set aside. Wealth, fame, this stuff didn't matter to her. You know what did matter to her? Character. And the Prophet showed 2 things to Khadija. He showed, number 1, that he is a responsible individual. And number 2, if he wanted to provide, he can. Right now, Muhammad maybe can't even provide. He doesn't have his own business. He doesn't have all of this. But he has the talents. He has the capacity. He has the capability. And these are the 2 things that matter in a marriage. It's not about, oh, he dresses this way and I don't know this. Or no. Do you trust him? Number 1. Number 2, can he provide? When the time comes, maybe he's studying right now. Maybe he's a little bit younger right now. But does he have the potential to grow into that role? The Prophet at this point didn't have a lot of wealth. No, but he had the potential to grow into a person who would bring about the type of wealth that he could provide for his own family. Khadija sets aside everything else because everything else will disappear in a marriage faster than you can even imagine. Before you know it, everything else becomes normal. You know what you're living with? You're living with the akhlaq of this person. Of course, physical attraction is important. Of course, all of these are important. But at the root of all of it is what? The akhlaq, the character of this person. This is why Khadija says, I can pay the dowry. It's not a problem at all. Because she knows she's going to come out the winner on the other side of this whole story. She knows what she's giving in return of what she's getting is not even comparable. And of course, the dowry is a responsibility of the husband. You have to imagine, this is before Islam, and the rulings of Islam have even come into the picture, yes? So those rulings are still there. But this is what Khadija is willing to do. And I wish that our young brothers and sisters would have the insight that Khadija had on the brother side and the sister side. Because how often do we have to deal with situations because at the time of marriage, the thought process and the insight wasn't there. And the decision was just made based on the most superficial of criteria. And then you have to deal with these difficulties that you have to deal with later on. No, akhlaq, nothing comes close to akhlaq. This relationship was so special that then Khadija and this household became a household that they brought another child into this house. It wasn't their own child. It was someone else who was a slave. It was a servant. He was freed by the Prophet. And this was none but Zayd ibn Haritha. He was brought into his own house. We'll discuss more about him in our next session, inshallah. And another person who was brought into the house of the Prophet was none but Ali ibn Abi Talib. Salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And the narration says this drought came and the Prophet was there with Khadija, and the Prophet chose this child of Abu Talib to bring. And there's more to be discussed in this regard. We will leave that, inshallah, for our next session. Let us take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, especially the marhumin and marhumat of the sponsors of tonight's program from this community as well as the St. Louis community, with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Yeah, I'll do.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد أشهد أن علي ولي الله أشهد أن علي حجة الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. حي على السلام، حي على السلام، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير الأمل، حي على خير الأمل. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم. أنت الرب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر عظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور. وهو الشهر الذي فرضت صيامه عليه. وهو الشهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من 1000 شهر. فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك من علي بفكاك رقبتي من النار في من تمن عليه وادخلني الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. سبحان الله والحمد لله الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. تسبيح فاطمة الزهراء سلام الله عليها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم أغن كل فقير. اللهم أشبع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل عريان. اللهم اغذ دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر، إنك على كل شيء قدير.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Mu'mineen, for the people who are interested in breaking fast with us, please give space to the volunteers so that they can set the dastarkhan, and then sit down where the dastarkhan is being set, and the volunteers will serve you iftar, inshallah. For the people who wish to leave, there are boxes to go near the exit. Please leave with the boxes. Please cooperate with the volunteers, and please be seated where you are. Same announcement for the sisters as well. Thank you. Mu'mineen, please take a seat at the sufra, at the dastarkhan, and the iftar will be served to you. Mominin, inshallah, as you leave, please take extra food. We have some leftover food. Please take extra as you leave. Jazakallah. Mominin, in the next 5 minutes, we will start Dua Iftatah. Inshallah, let us please commence cleanup with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil farajahum. Momineen, we are starting Dua Iftatah now. Inshallah, let us please settle down and get ready for Dua Iftatah. Bar Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat. Salli ala Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مصدد للصواب بمنك. وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يدا، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، ما حاجة به إليه عظيمة، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي، أتمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا، وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهله عليك، ولعل الذي أبتع عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي وأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك، فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالك الإصباح ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يحييني، الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مونقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين، وينجي الصالحين، ويرفع المستضعفين، ويدع المستكبرين، ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين، مبير الظالمين، مدرك الهاربين، نكال الظالمين، صريخ المستصرخين، موضع حاجات الطالبين، معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها، وترجف الأرض وعمارها، وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا، وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق، ويرزق ولا يرزق، ويطعم ولا يطعم، ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى، وهو حي لا يموت، بيده الخير، وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك، أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأتيب وأطهر وأسنى، وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة، وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا واشعب به سدعنا وارتق به فتقنا وكثر به قلتنا وأعزز به ذلتنا وأغن به عائلنا واغض به عن مغرمنا واجبر به فقرنا وسد به خلتنا ويسر به عسرنا وبيض به وجوهنا وفك به أسرنا وأنجح به طلبتنا وأنجز به مواعيدنا واستجب به دعوتنا وأعتنا به سؤلنا وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا وأعتنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وقلة عددنا وشدة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا فصل على محمد وآله وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله وبضر تكشفه ونصر تعزه وسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللناها وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد زيارة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.